Are you tired of your valuable ideas and suggestions getting lost in the shuffle? Well, that is why I'm introducing Direct Suggest, the revolutionary digital suggestion box that puts your voice front and center. With Direct Suggest, you have the power to make a difference in your organization. Direct Suggest provides value to organizations in various industries worldwide, including notable brands like Comcast, TD Bank, and Nokia. And here's the best part. Direct Suggest only costs 50 cents per employee per month, making it an affordable solution for businesses of all sizes. Plus, they have an incredibly high ROI and savings potential with an average 33 times return on investment. The implementation process is also a breeze. Once committed, setting up Direct Suggest from start to finish can be completed in as quickly as a week or less. Don't let your ideas or your team's ideas go unnoticed. Visit directsuggest.com today and start by making a difference with Direct Suggest. Use the promo code HUMANHR for your extended 60-day free trial. Again, visit directsuggest.com to learn more, and remember to use promo code HUMANHR for an extended free trial. Direct Suggest, where your voice matters. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. I have a wonderful guest on this week, Sophie Wade, who is a work futurist, international keynote speaker, author, instructor, and workforce innovation specialist at Future of Work consultancy, Flexel Network. Over 540,000 people have taken her LinkedIn video courses on empathy, Gen Z, and future of work skills. Sophie's executive advisory work and transformative workshops help leaders adapt to new business conditions and attract, engage, and retain a multi-generational distributed workforce. Sophie's first book, Embracing Progress, Next Steps for the Future of Work, which came out in May of 2017, was an EMBA textbook. And her latest book is Empathy Works, The Key to Competitive Advantage in the New Era of Work, which came out just recently in May of 2022. Sophie hosts the popular podcast Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, and she received her BA and MA at Oxford University and MBA at International Business School, INSEAD. Did I say that right, INSEAD? We'll edit this part. INSEAD. Okay, so I'll say that line over and the editor will replace it. She also received her BA and MA at Oxford University and MBA at International Business School, INSEAD. Sophie, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining today.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And we have quite the topic to dive into today. So I think we should just really jump in. I mean, we're going to be talking about tensions in the workplace and the strains between these remote and hybrid work models. So where do we start? Where does the strain come from? Where is the tension coming from in the workplace? And is there a model that is better or worse than the other?
Oh, you're launching right into the controversy. Yes. Okay, fantastic. So I think the tension comes from the fact, really fundamentally, that we're in a period of transformation, and it's quite turbulent. There is so much that is changing at the same time, driven by technology. And it means that at the same time as all of this is changing, that dealing with people working in different places is one more thing that, a number of leaders, particularly older, more traditional command and control type leaders, don't want to deal with. And so whilst some of them might embrace these new ways of working more if things generally were a little bit calmer, I think there is the desire to, get everybody back in the office and we can get on track and, I can get my arms around all of this. But that's not really what needs to happen, and it's not gonna actually help. So there's a lot of tension between particularly younger people who really, the people who've only just recently come into the workplace, they don't actually know very much other than the kind of the different types of ways of working that we were experiencing during the pandemic. So these new ways of working, working from home, working remotely, working in different places, working distributed models, is what they know. And for older people who have been in the workforce, much longer and have finally sort of seen that there are different ways that they could be setting up their working life. They could be working in different ways. They found out that they can be more productive in certain ways, and they're less productive here. They want to be in the office here. So all of these different things have been explored and discovered over the last few years. So now that group of people sort of saying, okay, and I want to, set up my life differently and do my best work. So there's a lot of tension as people are exploring new things, trying to work in different ways, trying to optimize how they're working and get everything done. And for everybody, it's slightly different for every company, for every team. And that is a lot to be dealing with at a time, as I say, when we're going through a lot of transition. So you do tend to get particularly from the older generations, like, we want you back in the office full time, and a lot of other people, particularly younger employees, but certainly not exclusively, are looking to benefit from all these mobile and distributed types of technologies, or enabling distributed work. That are really we spent billions investing in these in order to actually free ourselves up so that we could work in more distributed ways. So that's the source of the tension.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think about how transformational the pandemic, like what the pandemic did to transform, for example, workplaces. It was transformational in the sense that not only did workplaces obviously change, but also our entire society changed. The housing market changed, the where people lived, became a bigger discussion, because people now then moved out of these urban or city centers and into more rural areas. And everything was impacted by this shift in society because of the pandemic. And so I think, naturally, workplaces are at the crux, they're the nucleus to society, right? I mean, we think about all of that, and it makes sense that workplaces are now going through this. Okay, well, now we're out of the pandemic. Now what?
Well, so I wrote my first book. I wrote in 2017, obviously pre-pandemic, and I talked about all of these trends, apart from the changes in the sort of the city centers. But even that trend was happening pre-pandemic. The people were wanting to move out of the city centers. That was happening. It all got accelerated by the pandemic, and so the sort of the future of work really arrived in 2020. So it was driven by the fact that it was, I've been talking about the future of work and speaking about it and helping people transform ahead of it, or as we were getting there. And then suddenly we got this, pretty jarring acceleration. And that's what the challenge is because we haven't had a sort of way to ease into it. Now, I think it has been jarring. It has sort of taken a leap because so many of the other things, there have been some big aha moments, particularly in the US, where the sort of the work culture has been pretty severe in many ways in comparison to many European countries, where apart from anything, you get 6, 7, 8 weeks of vacation a year. So flexibility becomes that much more important on an average week. But there have been societal changes. It's not just technology. For example, back in the 60s, 67% of households, there was only one person working outside the home. That has changed. That was the golden era, the golden boom that happened after the war. Now it's very, very different. And for economic reasons, you have there's so many, I think it's 67%, it's close to 70% of families with kids under 18 in the house, both parents are working. Now, that means you need much more flexibility. So we have been going in this direction for a long time, trying to give more flexibility, trying to explore and use more work arrangements than just being in the office sort of 5 days a week, 9 to 5. So it has been going in that direction. And there was a lot of informal flexibility prior to the pandemic, but it hasn't been formalized, and we're now trying to, in this sort of jumpstart way, try and understand how we can best do it. And I think it's a very exciting time for HR, honestly, because HR, particularly in this new tech-driven world, there is a counterbalance, which is about talent. And that's for me the most exciting thing. It's that we need to bring together IT, HR, and FM, facilities management, together, because those three sort of divisions are really needed to help a company understand strategically how to set itself up for success.
Very interesting. And I know you are the person with all of the data. And so I would be remiss not to ask you a data specific question here. Is there research that shows how productivity is impacted by remote work versus hybrid work versus in person? Because obviously a lot of people are going on record to say one thing or another. And I'd love to hear your perspective.
Tracy, thank you for asking. So, yes, so it is early days since the quote end of the pandemic, right? To get steady data that really shows how people are working, that have learned how to work effectively in distributed ways. We are still going through the transformation right now. All of us are, all our companies. I mean, very few companies have really sort of knocked it out of the park and really got it, because there's a lot of different things moving at the same time. So the data that is quoted in or referred to in a number of media articles starting in April, May this year has been restated and a number of times. That data, a number of the studies actually go back to looking at comparing pre-pandemic and so the data, a lot of the data, some key research studies are comparing 2019 data, working from home and working in the office, to how people were working and their performance or the results or how many calls they were doing during the first months or the first year of the pandemic. So the question then for me is, for many companies, when they're looking to try and see, well, how can I understand the productivity in my company? Is that going to be relevant? Is data that goes back to the beginning of a global crisis, is that relevant data? And we're also, some of these key data, these research studies come from, there's an Indian data inputting company. There's another study which is looking at, I forget, another company in China, I think. But the question is, for me, when you're looking at data, if you're going to make any policy changes or considering making policy changes or tweaking, the key thing is really to understand the data for your company, to be asking employees, to be benchmarking for different departments because they should be tracked and measured in different ways. I think it is very relevant to look at different companies, different models, tweak and test and iterate. But some of this, we're still so new into this, sort of the beginning, the launching months and years of this new era of work, because it's not just work, it's like all this business, which is all these business elements and operations, which are digitalized, that it is hard to use a few select, very specific types of companies and moments in time, that in order to compare for any particular company and what's going to be effective going forward. You asked me what I think is the best model. So talking in conversations with a number of great folks in this area as well, Dominic Price, who's at Atlassian, Gary Bowles, who is the chair of the Future of Work at Singularity University. We all look at this, and there are others as well, Brian Elliott. We all look at this in terms of a flexible. What we're looking for is flexibility. Now, for HR folks, that probably is like makes your head explode, but it can be done on a unit by unit basis, because a fixed model, a fixed hybrid or structured hybrid model, still isn't going to get you the flexibility or get a team member or leader or teams working together, help each person individually and compromising among the team to do their very best work. Because, when I'm doing particular tasks versus you, Tracy, like we have different ways of working. And if you and I were working together on something versus you have to do something which is like your focus, individual work, and me too, we're going to be in a different setting, in a different environment. And so we need to work out what's best for the task we're working on, for the project we're working on. And that requires testing, understanding each other, really leaning in to sort of work out how we can do our best work. And we keep doing non-routine work. So the nature of work has changed a lot over the last 20 years, much more non-routine work. It's much less predictable, much more working together in teams. So we need to sort of understand each other better. And so if it's going to be a sort of a structured, a fixed couple of days a week, or at the office or at home, that's not going to give as much flexibility as optimal. I understand that that's a reasonable interim solution, but that's not the best place to end up, because really, if your business, anybody's business, is going to be pivoting, is going to be trying to respond quickly to changes in customer behavior. We all see how much we've been changing our own behaviors, where we're living, how we're shopping, how we're living our lives. Are we going to the movie theaters anymore? All these different things have been changing a lot over the last several years, but continue to change. And that means our businesses, the companies that we buy from and who serve us, are needing to change their businesses too. And that's going to continue as each company, introduces more technologies or upgrades, and my competitor has new technologies. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, how is that going to change how my customers, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a moving target. And therefore, it's not just how our businesses, if our businesses are needing to pivot and be very nimble, we need our employees to be nimble too.
Yeah, it's a great point. For me, I always say on the podcast, I could never imagine going back into the office, where I'm required to do so. I work remotely, flexibility is important to me, and I work in an HR role. And, I think about what you just said around, what true flexibility is, and that when you have a fixed structure to an environment, that there isn't this maximizing of flexibility, of course. And I just wonder, is it really such a hard pill to swallow for businesses to just enable the utmost flexibility so that the adults that are employed can make a decision that's best for them, to be empowered and entrusted to, have autonomy and get their work done as we expect, whether they're in an office or not, and then, still have these opportunities to come in person. Maybe it is once a month you do an all hands in person, fine. That's like one day that's structured out of the month. Like, is it so unreasonable to expect that businesses give this to employees? I personally don't think it's so unreasonable, but there are people out there that think it is unreasonable.
I do empathize and recognize that we're actually pretty good at dealing with change, but we are creatures of habit. And the pandemic was a lot of change. And it's brought even more change and ongoing change. And so, as I said, at the beginning, if leaders really want to get their arms around something and kind of like, I want everybody back in the office so we can just like get focused and get going again, I can understand how that could feel like the right solution. As I said, I actually believe that's completely the wrong solution. And it's not going to be helpful. Yeah. It also isn't logical or even a credible solution for some of the younger folks who are going to be looking, kind of going, but that doesn't make any sense. I mean, how can we, if I want to do my best work and, if we're using these technologies, like, why do we design all these technologies? So I think we have people who are used to old, particular conventional, traditional ways of doing things, and trying to move forward and meet objectives and meet the shareholders' demands and the expectations of the stock market, et cetera, when so much is changing, is hard. And so it's kind of like, I could understand if it's like, I would try and reduce the amount of change we're having to deal with at the same time. However, this is the moment. There are companies that are fully embracing this and learning as hard as they can to work out how to move forward with whatever model is going to make sense. And that means being flexible, and it means trying to understand, what's right for this particular team. And you don't have to be, sort of exploding your mind by thinking like every single person in the whole company is going to be working differently. Well, if a leader is working with a team, they can work it out among that team. And then, and everybody also can contribute to making sure it works, right? It's not up to all on that leader. Everybody is taking more responsibility and accountability because we're pushing decisions down and out across organizations. We need to be able to respond quickly. And that means we're all taking more ownership of the results, of the decisions, of, trying to come up with sort of this co-creation verb that's being used, or noun that's being used now in terms of how we move forward, because we're all trying to contribute. There's a lot to be thinking about. There's a lot to be trying to work out, and we can all be part of the solution too.
Yeah, I totally agree. As you were saying this, I pulled up this article that I had read this morning it was in Reuters, and it's basically about how the return to office crackdown could backfire. And that it goes on to say moves by U.S. financial firms to enforce strict return to office mandates could drive employees to leave, according to a study published by Deloitte. Of 700 financial executives surveyed, 66% who worked remotely part-time said they would likely quit if ordered to return to the office 5 days a week. Now, obviously, we're extrapolating this data. I haven't given you any time to read through the data, which I know is probably painful. But, it also says that the study showed that caregivers with remote or hybrid arrangements were 1.3 times more likely to leave their jobs if that flexibility was taken away. I don't think this is so surprising, right? Like we were able to successfully work and accomplish things for basically 2 years through the pandemic in most industries that were able to move remote. Not every industry could. But then you think about, this industry, for example, I think about the financial services industry, which is historically pretty conservative in terms of how they approach, just workplace norms in general. And I think it's a really interesting data point that 66% of those surveyed are saying that they would likely quit. Now, obviously, again, this is a part-time survey. How are full-time people influenced? But there are moments where I think, and I'm sure that you have this feeling too, because you have a podcast, where I'm like, if even just one more person guiding these decisions could listen to what we're saying, to the reality that people are desiring flexibility, and you can have your cake and eat it too, in the sense that you can have productive workforces and also provide them the flexibility. I think that we would probably move some more mountains potentially more quickly. And then this also, leads me to that. We spoke before we started recording about Zoom, and naturally by the time this episode comes out, Zoom could have a totally different article out. But there was an article, and of course, the media, as you had mentioned before we started recording, the media really takes a bite into what clickbait titles do, which is to grab as much attention as possible. And there was this discussion that Zoom is moving people back to the office, which sounds crazy, right? Because you read a headline, you're like, why would Zoom, the pioneer of workplace flexibility and remote work, why would they expect this from their employees? But you said something interesting. So I'd love to hear your perspective on how the media portrays this dichotomy or these challenges and tensions, and maybe to speak to the Zoom situation a little bit more. If your company is remote or hybrid, then you know just how difficult it can be to grow your company's culture beyond a pre-scheduled Zoom happy hour or occasional lunch and learn. Well, this week's sponsor is here to solve that. They're called CultureBot. CultureBot has devised what will likely become the gold standard for growing and blossoming a company culture inside of Slack. The app is like a sidekick for any HR or people professional, automating a lot of the mundane tasks you probably are forgetting to do on a daily basis. Things like birthday and work anniversary celebrations, team shoutouts and kudos, employee introductions, and remote games. It even has health and wellness tips and conversation starters. If that piques your interest, this will get you even more excited. Today, I'm able to share a special promotion for listeners of the podcast. You can get your first 6 months of CultureBot for 50% off. Plus, if your team is under 25 employees, CultureBot is free forever. So if you're looking for a way to create a culture of appreciation and drive increased engagement and togetherness across your team, I definitely recommend checking out CultureBot. Go to getculturebot.com/humanhr. That's getculturebot.com/humanhr to get the offer. Plus, I've added the link in the show notes so you can just click right there. Now, let's get back to the podcast.
So, yes, first of all, in fact, I don't know if it was 2020 or 2021, the Zoom executives actually did originally try and get everybody back in the office. Apparently, and everybody was like, "I'm sorry, we are not the company to be doing this." So that didn't work then. So, speaking to this article, which is, August 2023, it was the title of the article looked like Zoom was forcing everybody back into the office, which sounds like 5 days a week. No, they were actually, as we've had numbers of articles which say have the same kind of title, clickbait titles. They are trying to confirm that people have to be in the office 2 days a week. And I think if they're more than 50 miles away from the office, they can be in fewer days a week or only a few times a month. So I'm not quite sure if you live 51 miles away, it gets a little sort of odd in those type of things. I think there are lots of different companies, and there was one I think in May which was talking about all of the tech giants doing this, that, and the other, and they started off with Google, which had actually said that some remote workers were no longer allowed to be fully remote, or some people who were coming in, if they'd already had it approved, they could, but they're coming in, they wouldn't get it. But generally, what they were trying to do is reinforce or try and get people who were all allowed to be doing 3 days a week, had to be 3 days a week in the office, to actually come in. So there are lots and lots of mandates out there, which people are just not coming in for. And I believe a lot of that is to do with trust. And what all this boils down to is trust. Because, prior to the pandemic, if you're going into the office, you didn't necessarily understand that whether your manager or leader did or didn't trust you. Then come the pandemic, you were trusted. You needed to be trusted. And you got stuff done. And now if you're being told, well, you have to come into the office, sort of ... I don't necessarily trust you. So I think if we can go with the trust, so I believe there are many workers who don't want to go back into the office, however many days a week, because they don't believe, or they may believe that if they were to do that, they're going to be forced to be there 5 days a week. And I think when we can really start to build trust, which is why, my second book is about empathy. It's like when we can build those trusting relationships between the manager and the team, and you can use benchmarks, and there are all different ways that you can ensure people are contributing to make sure to help them be performing and doing and focusing on results rather than presence. Then we can actually get to a place where the business is really growing and succeeding, and employees are much happier and engaged in their work at the same time. So I think we really need to, there have been a lot of disingenuous articles which are, trying to either get us to click or feed into this sort of incendiary tension, which is, is good for, good for selling advertising, but it really doesn't help us. I mean, we need to, there's so much wasted time and energy and stress, and that includes, I was actually very disheartened to be seeing that a couple of friends of mine on LinkedIn had been, DM'd to say that they couldn't, at their companies, they felt that if they actually liked a post which was talking about remote working or hybrid or distributed work, that would actually count against them. That would be noticed, and they would be, they would actually have could have some negative repercussion. That for me is a huge problem.
That's a huge problem.
So I do hope that we can, I don't believe that the, September, October, that whatever new push back to the workplace has been going on, I don't believe it's going to be successful. I think the companies that really continue to be pushing for that are going to really suffer and have huge problems, whether it's with caregivers, whether it's with young people, whether they're engaged or just going through the motions because they're actually focusing on their side hustle and trying to get out of there as soon as possible. I don't know. But I think the more sensible companies, honestly, are going to just get with the program and just embrace it and just play. Okay, now let's look at distributed work. Now let's look at asynchronous working and how can we maximize all these amazing technologies that we built to make this work better.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I'm thinking about what you said in the beginning of the podcast, which was around this idea of talent and how talent has become a huge construct to all of this, but also a huge focus. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you was what you, almost like a prediction, what you think could come of this push for going back to work, and or back to the office, I should say. And you kind of already touched on this just now. But I would imagine that similarly to what we saw while we were still in the pandemic from companies that were like, hey, we got to go back to the office, and people were like, not a chance, and they had to change, and they had to be more flexible, and they had to enable a different way of working, that if there is enough of a push from businesses to return to the office, I would imagine that there would be that same type of, for lack of a better term, rebellion in some ways, and that would result in a lack of the ability to find strong talent, which is already a challenge. So do you have predictions? Does this sound like something that you would sign off on, or can you
Oh, yes,
expand?
absolutely. I mean, so we've seen the Great Resignation, which was basically, over 4
Mm-hmm.
million people were resigning in the US every month. And the numbers haven't been quite, I think, since January 2023, the numbers have been close to 4 million still. So it's not that it's changing. I don't call it necessarily the Great Resignation. I think for me, it is an overdue understanding of workers, of employees, but workers, whether they're, non-employees, they could be independent contractors, because I think
Mm-hmm.
I do foresee in the future people using many more types of employment arrangements to their benefit and to the benefit of companies. There's much more flexibility overall in terms of maybe I want to work part-time, and then in the rest of my week, I want to have 3 or 4 different clients, for example. Therefore, I'm not beholden to one company and put all my eggs in one basket, which is most risky for me. So
Mm-hmm.
I do see that this sort of there was a lovely article I think in 2020 which said epiphany quitting, and I love that term. I was
Oh,
like,
I love
oh look, I can live my life differently.
that.
So I
Right.
do think there's a very positive, honestly, a positive side to this in terms of employees looking at how they can live their lives differently, which ultimately can be extremely beneficial to the companies that they work for. Because if both sides lean into this, I do see this truly as a win-win. It sounds like a cliche, but
Mm-hmm.
I do see this as a win-win, that you can, find out what that employee is good for. There's great Gallup data which shows that when managers align their employees to their skills and strengths, the engagement goes up, profits go up, revenues go up. I mean, stats for that. And so, yes, on the flip side, you're going to get people who are quitting. You're going to get people who, or they're not engaging, they're disengaging. And whether I'd hate all these labels like quiet quitting, but I do know that there
Mm-hmm.
are many young people who they might want to stay in their job to have healthcare, because that is a big expense in the US. And whilst if they don't feel that there's a culture that's trying to nurture them and particularly make sure that they keep being upskilled, because this is, if they have no job security, this
Mm-hmm.
comes to the issue of loyalty. And what does loyalty mean? Well, if this company I'm working for is keeping me upskilled, is helping me can be competitive, and I can do my best work and make sure that the business needs are met, and I'm continue to be learning and all the rest of it, then I'm going to stay engaged. But if that's not happening, why would I stay? Why would I engage when I can actually put my efforts and energies somewhere else, which is going to be better for me, because I need to stay competitive. Otherwise, I have no financial security whatsoever. I mean, these are very, very real concerns for the young talent group now.
Yeah, absolutely. All really good points. And I think my final question for you is actually a little bit Gen Z focused. I know that you spent quite some time focusing on this generation, but Gen Z is so interesting, and I repeat myself on the podcast all the time that Gen Z are the disruptors, and they have changed the way that we think about work and what workplaces experiences all the time. They gone are the days where there's this feeling of, oh well, this doesn't meet my work life balance needs, I'm just going to figure it out and work through it until I find that next job. Gen Z is like, okay, this doesn't work for me, I'm going to go find something else now because you're not meeting my needs. And I think it's so powerful to see how this generation, which will eventually be the majority in the workforce soon enough, has been able to really be, a disruptor again in workplaces. That said, I've also read a lot, and I'm curious to hear about any data that you might have. I've read a lot that Gen Z there's this, almost dichotomy here, that there is a part of Gen Z that's like, I just graduated college. I want to meet people. I want to have the ability to go in the office, and I want to have ultimate flexibility, which kind of does come back to how can we just make it all happen for people, right?
Mhm.
But is this an accurate perspective of Gen Z, and is Gen Z really as transformative as I'm perceiving them to be? And do we see their generation really enhancing and transforming the workplace as the years go on?
Yes and no and yes. And I'll explain why. So I don't see them as the disruptors. However, they are being they're not deliberately being disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
They are manifesting, and let's just not say Gen Z, the younger people, because
Mm-hmm.
I don't like being told off for like using
Sure,
generational
sure,
label
sure,
names.
sure.
But so the younger people that come to workforce, they don't know anything else. They come in and they're reacting to what is. Now, if I have 20, 25, 30 years, whatever years of experience, even if things have changed, I'm going to feel that it's the same, or I'm going to try and make it the same because that's what I'm comfortable with and that's what I know. But so the younger people who don't have entrenched ways of doing things, who have these sort of routines that they've been in the ways that they've been working for years and years and years, they are the ones that we can look to try and understand the most about the future of work. So when I look at them, I'm like, oh, this is what the future of work looks like. So it's not that they're causing it, it's that they are showing us how different it is. Now, they don't necessarily know what to do with all of that. And so, it's a little bit the blind leading the blind here. So that's not very
Mm.
helpful. However, there's some interesting data which really sort of help me see some things more clearly. So I want to share these with you.
Mm-hmm.
So I was sitting with a group of Gen Zs now. So this is not a research study, but I was just chatting with a whole bunch of them. And they had been absolutely on point, giving me all kinds of really, this, and this, like knew exactly what their answers were. And then I sort of said, well, and it seemed like it was a pretty normal question to me. I said, so what do you want to be doing in, career-wise in 5 to 10 years time? Silence.
Hmm.
Confusion. And what came out of that, their final sort of agreement, all of them were, I want to be learning all the time. I will leave my employer if I stop learning. I will leave my employer if I stop learning and I don't get a promotion, because that will, that sort of takes you up to the next level to be learning again. It's because the focus is so much on learning. I then found some data, which is from a YouGov from 2019, which said that 18 to 24-year-olds in 2019, 54% of them believe that they're going to do a career that doesn't exist yet.
Wow.
Now, think about that. So if I am 24, 25, why would I choose a career at the point when I'm still like trying to work out my skills, trying to work out what I'm good at, where I should focus, what I want to focus on? If things keep changing, it doesn't make sense. And so then I look back at that conversation and the fact that they suddenly were confused and had sort of didn't have the kind of longer term, medium term perspective that I had certainly, when I was sort of at that point in my sort of career development. And, there's data that shows that people have multiple careers, maybe 5 careers over the course of their lifetime. So I also found all this data about job hopping and Gen Zs, they job hop and job hop. And I was like, well, hang on a second. Maybe they're not job hopping. Maybe they're exploring.
Mm-hmm.
They're exploring skills. They're exploring types of company. They're exploring different, ways of working and strategies. There's also data that shows it's actually still very, very hard. And this is something that HR does really, I believe, need to focus on because of where we are and how things are changing. It's very hard to move internally within a company. We don't have these linear careers anymore that go incrementally up the hierarchy. People need to be crossing over, moving horizontally, moving diagonally. And if they can't move horizontally or diagonally because it isn't always a step up, then it's easier to step out. And that's what, companies, if they want people to stay and actually, keep helping them upskill and develop, within the company, that is something that needs to change. And that isn't that easy. So that for me sort of said, well, hang on a second. If I'm exploring, if I don't have an understanding or I haven't decided on my career because I'm sort of leaving it open because that's how much things are changing, isn't that going to make me focus on the here and now? Isn't that going to make me focus on work-life balance? Because there's no point in sort of killing myself, working incredibly long hours every day if I don't even know where I'm going.
Fascinating.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Now I'm going to go down a rabbit hole reading into all of this. I mean, it makes so much sense.
Right?
It really does. Yeah, it really makes so much sense. And I love that you said, well, maybe it's not job hopping, it's exploring, because it really, first of all, there's really nothing wrong with going to different jobs. Certainly, if a company has experienced a lack of retention because of their own challenges and they see someone with 3 months here, 5 months here, 3 months here, a year here, I could understand the hesitation. But when you see, a year, to me, going from like a job where you're somewhere for a year, maybe a year and a half, and you're bouncing around a little bit and it's figuring out what you like, or getting, exposure to things, maybe they're learning more by going to these different companies. I don't see anything wrong with that. There's this, it's a really great way of rephrasing.
Yes, and think about it. Like, if I'm at a company, so if I have no security for my future other than the skills that I have, if a company is not keeping me upskilled and keeping me learning, it's actually not good for me. It makes me worried about my future or my financial security. So if you see that people do have those skills and those skills keep growing, and obviously, you can test for those skills in particular ways, that would be what I'd be concerned about. Because if somebody is moving around, and there was data from LinkedIn which showed that, which said that only 20%, I think it was, Gen Zs, 20% of Gen Zs believe that their company or that their manager can help them or is engaged in helping them with their next career step. Only 20%. Yeah. Very small. So, and I do understand that HR has not been set up to move people around internally. People need to be willing to sort of share their great rising, leaders into other teams, and need to have the relationships across organizations to be able to do that. It's not easy. That's organizational change. Right. But that is one of the things that we need in order to be able to keep and engage and help these, younger folks really grow within the organization and stay there.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you bringing all of this data-driven knowledge to us today on a topic that is so often talked about and yet still so important and has to remain a focus of and a point of conversation, because it is constantly changing. We are seeing, all of this discussion because every industry is different, every company is different, every person is different. And so I really appreciate you joining the podcast today. With that, where can the listeners buy your books, meet you, maybe connect with you, learn more about what you do, and listen to your podcast?
Thank you so much, Tracy. So LinkedIn is a really great place to find me. I'm always posting data or making comments or sharing stuff. So that's a sort of good hub. Otherwise, sophiewade.com and flexcelnetwork.com, and Transforming Work with Sophie Wade is my podcast, and that's available on all the platforms. So thank you. It's been great to be here, and I love the opportunity to share some of these sort of insights that were sort of epiphanies that came to me over the last 6 months or so. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting. I'm really curious as to see how we all start engaging with this new way of working and the new ways that careers are developing.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see even a year from now what might be the reality or what we might be discussing as the next frontier. So maybe we'll have to come back to this. But Sophie, thank you again. All of your links will be in the show notes, of course, for the listeners, and really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.